Thank you for being here. Today I want to talk about something that sits beneath everything we do, something that determines whether a person, a company, or even a civilization thrives or quietly decays into mediocrity. It's not about intelligence, it's not about money, or technology, or even luck. It's about the question. The truth is, our world has become obsessed with answers. We worship answers. We build entire industries around them. We celebrate speed, precision, efficiency, but rarely curiosity. And yet, most of humanity's problems don't come from the lack of answers. They come from asking the wrong questions. I've repeated one idea for years. One of the really tough things is figuring out what questions to ask. Once you figure out the question, then the answer is the relatively easy part. That's not a slogan. It's an operating principle, a mental algorithm for solving problems that seem impossible. It's what separates people who make small improvements from those who change the course of history. The bug in the human operating system, we all carry an operating system inside our minds, a way of processing the world. It helps us make thousands of decisions every day, what to eat, where to go, how to solve a small issue at work. For 99% of life, it works beautifully. But deep inside that system, there's a fatal flaw, a bug that limits human progress more than anything else. That bug is called reasoning by analogy. Reasoning by analogy means we copy, we imitate. We look at what others have done and we repeat it with slight modifications. It feels safe because it works until the moment you need to innovate. When you reason by analogy, you don't actually understand why something works. You simply assume that because it worked before, it must still be true. It's how entire industries get stuck, creating endless variations of the same thing. Faster horses instead of the first car, bigger phones instead of a revolution in communication. You see this everywhere. A company looks at a competitor and says, they have this feature, we'll build it too, but ours will be cheaper or shinier or blue. It's imitation disguised as progress. The truth is, reasoning by analogy is efficient but shallow. It saves energy, but it sacrifices imagination. It helps you survive, but it stops you from evolving. It's the mental equivalent of autopilot, useful for flying straight, but useless when the landscape changes. That's why innovation almost never comes from those already comfortable. It comes from people who stop assuming, people who dare to ask, why does it have to be this way? Most of the world's systems in energy, transportation, healthcare, education are built on stacked layers of analogy. People copying people, until no one remembers the first principle behind it. We've forgotten how to question the foundation. Let's look at a simple example. People used to ask, where are our flying cars? It's a terrible question. It assumes that car is the correct starting point. But the real purpose was never to make a car fly. The purpose was to move humans efficiently in 3 dimensions. And once you ask about movement, not cars, you realize the answer already exists. Airplanes, helicopters, drones. Analogy narrows your field of vision. First principles, expand it. Another example, if you asked someone in the year 1900 what they wanted for transportation, they'd say a faster horse, because that's the only frame of reference they had. They couldn't imagine the car because they were asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, how do I make my horse faster, the better question would have been, how can we move from one place to another faster, cheaper, and more reliably? Once you ask that, the horse disappears. The entire paradigm shifts. Tim Urban, the writer of Wait But Why, uses a beautiful metaphor that captures this idea. He talks about the cook and the chef. The cook is the analogy thinker. The cook follows the recipe. He knows that if you mix this with that, you get a predictable outcome. But take away one ingredient, and he's lost. The cook doesn't understand why the recipe works. He only knows that it does. The chef is different. The chef knows the chemistry of flavor, the balance of heat and acid, the texture that defines a dish. He doesn't need a recipe because he understands the principles behind cooking itself. Give him an empty kitchen and he will still create something extraordinary. Our world is filled with cooks, people who execute perfectly but rarely think differently. We need more chefs, people who can see the ingredients of reality itself and imagine new combinations. You can't reach Mars with a cookbook. You can't redefine energy or consciousness by repeating what has already been done. You must go deeper. You must question the assumptions that everyone else takes for granted. That's where first principles live at the root of truth. The human mind loves analogy because it's comforting. It gives us a sense of control, but it's also a cage. When you live by analogy, you're living inside the imagination of someone else. You're following a map drawn centuries ago, and you never stop to wonder if the terrain has changed. The real innovators, the ones who change industries, nations, and civilizations, are those who realize that maps are temporary. They throw them away and look directly at the landscape. They rebuild from the ground up, even if it means failing hundreds of times. Because they know that what matters isn't having the right answer, it's having the courage to ask a better question. That's the first principle of creation. Before you solve, you must unlearn. Before you build, you must break down the illusion that things have to be the way they are. The world doesn't need more people optimizing small details of a broken system. It needs people willing to rebuild the system from the ground up. It needs people who ask questions so simple, so fundamental, that they make experts uncomfortable. Because that's how progress begins, not with certainty, but with curiosity. And so if there is one idea that forms the foundation of everything I do, it's this. The future belongs not to those who have all the answers, but to those who never stop asking the right questions. Crisis philosophy and the answer 42. Why do I care about questions so much? Why spend my entire life obsessed with the structure of thinking itself, with the invisible grammar of curiosity? It's not about business. It's not even about science. It's personal. It began when I was a kid growing up in South Africa, a quiet, strange kid who didn't quite fit into the noise of the world. I remember being 12, maybe 14, when everything suddenly felt meaningless. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was confusion. I started to realize that every adult around me seemed to be following scripts they didn't write. They went to work, they went home, they argued, they laughed, but I could tell none of them really knew why they were doing any of it. And that question, why, started haunting me. I began reading everything I could find, science fiction, philosophy, religion. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand the nature of existence, the reason for consciousness, the point of all this motion and suffering. But the deeper I went, the darker it got. The philosophers, especially the German ones, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, they didn't give comfort. They stripped away illusions. They forced me to look at the possibility that maybe life had no meaning at all. For a teenager, that's a heavy thought. You start wondering if existence is just an accident. If every dream, every love, every effort is just a flicker before the void. It's not just academic. It hurts. It erodes your will to try. I was dangerously close to giving up, to accepting that nothing really matters. Then something unexpected happened. One book changed everything. It wasn't a philosophy textbook. It wasn't a holy scripture. It was a comedy piece of absurd science fiction, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And that book, in its humor, carried a truth deeper than any I had found in Nietzsche. It made me laugh, but it also woke me up. You see, in that story, there's a group of hyper-intelligent beings who build a massive supercomputer called Deep Thought. They design it to answer the ultimate question, what is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? The computer spends 7.5 million years thinking. Finally, it reveals the answer. The crowd gathers. The universe holds its breath, and the answer is 42. Everyone is furious. They think it's nonsense. But the computer calmly replies, the answer is 42. You just don't know what the question is. And that moment changed the trajectory of my entire life, because I realized that's us. That's humanity. We keep building smarter tools, faster computers, bigger cities, more complicated systems. We're obsessed with generating answers, but we rarely stop to understand what we're actually asking. We don't suffer from a lack of information. We suffer from a lack of the right questions. Douglas Adams made me see that the search for meaning isn't about finding the ultimate answer. It's about learning to ask better questions. It's about realizing that the meaning of life is not a static truth waiting to be discovered. It's an evolving process of curiosity itself. That realization saved me. It pulled me out of the void. It gave me a mission to expand the scope and scale of human consciousness, to help humanity live longer, grow smarter, and reach farther, so that one day, maybe, we can understand what questions the universe has been trying to ask all along. That's why I build what I build. That's why I take risks that seem insane to others. Because to truly evolve, we must become a species capable of asking cosmic questions, not just human ones. But philosophy alone isn't enough. The universe doesn't reward wishful thinking. To turn that insight into something real, you need a method, a framework that can translate curiosity into engineering. You need a way to strip away assumptions and rebuild from truth. I found that method in the most unlikely place, physics. The physics framework, breaking reality to first principles, if reasoning by analogy is the mental habit that keeps humanity trapped in repetition, then first principles thinking is the tool that breaks the loop. It is the bridge between philosophy and engineering, the discipline that transforms curiosity into invention. When people ask how I think, I tell them I use what I call the physics framework. Because physics, more than any other science, is the practice of truth. It doesn't care about convention or authority or politics. It doesn't care what's popular or profitable. It only cares about what's real. Physics begins with questions so simple they sound childish. What is this made of? What happens if I remove gravity? What laws stay the same even when everything else changes? That's why physics is such a powerful framework for thinking. It forces you to strip away illusion. You can't negotiate with gravity. You can't vote on thermodynamics. You can only understand them or ignore them and suffer the consequences. So how do you apply that kind of thinking to life, to technology, to progress? You treat every problem the same way a physicist treats the universe. You boil it down to its most basic truths. You identify what you know for certain, and then you rebuild reality from there. The algorithm of first principles. Over the years, I've turned this into a simple process, an algorithm you can apply to almost anything. It's only 3 steps, but if done honestly, it can overturn entire industries. Step 1, identify and break down current assumptions. Every system in your life, from how you brush your teeth to how you build a rocket, is held together by invisible assumptions. You must start by doubting them. Question everything, especially the things everyone knows. When you hear a statement like, batteries are expensive, or rockets can't be reused, stop and ask, is that physics, or is that habit? The moment you see an assumption clearly, you're already one step closer to innovation. Step 2, deconstruct the problem to its fundamental truths. This is the hard part. You have to keep digging. What's the problem made of literally? What are its raw components, its atoms, its essential elements? If it's a rocket, then it's not a rocket anymore. It's aluminum, titanium, copper, and carbon fiber. If it's a car, it's just metals, chemicals, circuits, and energy flow. If it's a business model, it's just people, time, and trust. Once you've reached the fundamental truths, you have something solid, something you can actually reason from. Step 3, reconstruct reality from zero. Now you begin again, forget what has been done. Start with your bedrock truths and ask, if I were building this from scratch, knowing only these basic facts, what would I do? You'll be amazed by how strange the real answer looks. It won't resemble what came before, because it's no longer built from analogy, it's built from truth. This method sounds simple, but it's not. Most people never reach step 2 because it feels uncomfortable. It demands humility. You must accept that much of what you know might be wrong. You must accept that you've been following recipes written by someone else long ago and that their context no longer applies. But if you can get through that, if you can look at the raw ingredients of reality without fear or pride, then you can build something truly new. That's what happened when I started SpaceX. That's what happened again with Tesla. In both cases, the right question changed everything, because once you get the question right, the answer becomes almost inevitable. Questioning the sky. Back in the early 2000s, I had a dream, a ridiculous, naive, impossible dream. I wanted to send something to Mars, not people, not a colony, just a small greenhouse, a symbol, a message to humanity that said, we are still explorers. I wanted to make people excited about the future again. At that time, I had just sold PayPal. I had some capital, some freedom, and an unreasonable amount of curiosity. So I thought, how hard could it be to buy a rocket? Turns out, it was very hard. the wrong question. The first step I took, like most people, was the wrong one. I asked, how can I buy a rocket? That's reasoning by analogy. It's assuming the system works and that all you have to do is participate. It's the same as saying, how do I buy a cheaper horse when what you really need to do is invent the car? I went to Russia. I tried to buy a used intercontinental ballistic missile, the kind designed to deliver destruction, not life. The price, $65 million for one rocket. Non-reusable, single use, no iteration possible. And so I came home empty-handed. At first it felt like failure, but on the flight back, something clicked. I realized I wasn't asking the right question. The shift, instead of asking, how do I buy a rocket, I asked, what is a rocket made of? It sounds simple, almost stupidly simple, but that's the beauty of first principles. A rocket isn't magic. It's aluminum, titanium, copper, carbon fiber, all physical materials. So I went deeper. I asked, what do these materials cost on the commodity market? I did the math. I compared the numbers. And what I found shocked me. The raw material cost of a rocket was around 2% of the total selling price. 2%. That meant 98% of the cost was inefficiency, layers of bureaucracy, stacked contractors, outdated processes, decades of doing things the way they've always been done. It wasn't physics making rockets expensive. It was human habit. And once you realize that, the world opens up. The right question. So I reframed it. Instead of asking, how do I buy a rocket for less, I asked, how do I build one from scratch using the raw materials as efficiently as possible? That question changed everything. It wasn't about imitation anymore. It wasn't about joining an industry. It was about reinventing it. It was about looking at reality and saying, what's physically possible, not what's historically accepted. And so SpaceX was born. Not from ambition, not from ego, but from curiosity, from a single, better formulated question. We bought the raw materials, we built our own engines, we tested, we failed, we rebuilt. And within a few years, we had cut the cost of launching a rocket by almost 10 times. But even then, there was more to ask. The next question, the industry told us rockets could never be reusable. That's just how it is. They said, they burn up, they fall apart. That's the law of rocketry. But again, I asked, is that physics or is that tradition? Because physics doesn't say a rocket can't land. It only says it's very hard. So we tried. We failed a lot. We exploded on landing pads. We watched boosters crash into the ocean. And each failure whispered back, you're getting closer. Failure, when you're working from first principles, is not defeat, it's feedback. It's the universe saying, you're asking the right question, keep refining the answer. Eventually, one booster came back. It landed upright, steady, almost elegantly, on a tiny platform floating in the middle of the ocean. People cheered. But for me, it wasn't just an engineering victory, it was philosophical. It was proof that when you challenge assumptions, when you go beyond analogy, you can rewrite the laws of what's possible. SpaceX was never just about rockets. It was an experiment in thinking. It was a test of whether human curiosity, guided by physics and grounded in truth, could overcome centuries of conventional wisdom. And the answer was yes. Not because we were smarter, but because we asked better questions. That's what first principles does. It replaces imitation with imagination. It replaces habit with truth. And it transforms the impossible into the inevitable. Questioning energy. When we talk about energy, we're really talking about life itself. Every heartbeat, every movement, every spark of thought in your brain is energy transforming from one form into another. But somewhere along the way, humanity forgot that. We started treating energy like a product, a commodity, something that can be bought, taxed, or fought over, instead of what it really is, the pulse of civilization. When I began thinking about electric cars, people laughed. They thought it was cute. They said, oh, that's nice, an idealistic little science project. because in their minds, electric cars were slow, boring, and impractical. They were relics from the past failed experiments that could never compete with the internal combustion engine. Even the so-called experts, engineers, investors, entire industries agreed it's not possible to make money with electric cars. They'll always be too expensive. That's what happens when people live by analogy. They take the past and use it as a template for the future. They say, it has always been this way, therefore it will always be this way. It's comfortable, it feels safe, but it's not truth. It's just repetition wearing a suit. When I heard all that noise, I didn't argue. I just asked a different question. I asked, why are electric cars expensive? And almost everyone gave the same answer, because batteries are expensive. That was the accepted truth, the dogma of the auto industry. But I wasn't satisfied, because I had learned something from SpaceX, from those long nights staring at equations and explosions, that whenever the world tells you something cannot be done, it usually means no one has actually done the math. So I did. Sat down and asked the question again in a way only physics would allow. What is a battery actually made of? And I broke it down. Atom by atom, element by element, a battery isn't a mystery. It's just materials, carbon, nickel, aluminum, lithium, polymers, steel, all things you can find on Earth, all things you can price on a commodities exchange. I looked them up, and what I found was shocking. The total cost of those materials was about $80 per kilowatt hour. 80. But the industry said $600 per kilowatt hour was the standard. It was how it's always been. So where did the other $520 go? It wasn't the atoms. It was the ignorance. It was the inefficiency of design, the layers of middlemen, the waste of thinking small. It was the cost of reasoning by analogy. People weren't building based on physics, they're building based on tradition. That's when everything clicked. The question was never, how do we make batteries cheaper? The real question was, how do we take the exact same materials, the same carbon, the same nickel, the same aluminum, and assemble them intelligently, efficiently, beautifully, for as close to $80 as possible? That was a solvable question. A question rooted in physics, not nostalgia, a question that could change everything. From that question, Tesla was born. I remember those early days, the smell of aluminum, the whir of machinery, the feeling of standing on the edge of something enormous and fragile at the same time. We didn't have legacy systems. We didn't have bureaucracies or traditions. All we had was curiosity. Every engineer was encouraged to ask, what are we assuming here? We questioned everything, the shape of the battery cell, the chemistry of the anode, the structure of the cooling system. If someone said, we can't do that, we would pause and ask, why not? What law of physics forbids it? And most of the time, there wasn't one. It was just habit pretending to be wisdom. That's how we designed the Gigafactory, not as a factory, but as a question turned into metal. It was a place built to rethink everything about how energy is created, stored, and shared. A living experiment in first principles thinking. We started optimizing not just for cost, but for truth. We didn't ask, how do we compete with other car companies? We asked, how do we accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy? Because once you frame the question correctly, your goal becomes infinite. We built cars that could outperform gasoline engines. We created systems that could scale globally, powered by the sun. And little by little, the laughter stopped. The mockery turned to curiosity, and then to fear. Because when you change the question, you change the game. But the story of Tesla isn't just a story about cars. It's about mindset. It's about humanity waking up from the dream that progress has to look like the past. It's about realizing that the laws of nature don't care about your business model or your profit margins or your legacy. They only care about what's true. And once you align with truth, the universe starts to cooperate. When we built the first Roadster, it was heavy, imperfect, clunky, but it worked. It proved something fundamental, that an electric car didn't have to be boring. It could be fast, beautiful, thrilling. And that moment, that feeling, was the spark that reignited an entire industry. Suddenly, every car manufacturer on Earth started whispering the same phrase they used to mock, "We need to go electric." Not because it was trendy, not because it was moral, but because it was inevitable. And that inevitability came not from me, not from Tesla, but from physics, from a single, relentless question that refused to die. What is energy really made of? And how can we honor it better? The more I think about it, the more I realize that energy is a mirror of consciousness. It flows, it adapts, it resists stagnation. And every time humanity tries to control it through greed or fear, it pushes back. It demands evolution. That's what Tesla represents. Not a company, not even a brand, but an idea. An idea that energy should not enslave humanity. It should liberate us. That innovation isn't just about speed or scale. It's about harmony with the laws that govern the universe. And the moment we stop asking questions, the moment we become comfortable with good enough, that's the moment we begin to decay. So we keep asking, we keep doubting, we keep building, not because we need more cars, but because we need more courage. The courage to imagine a future where technology and nature are not enemies, but partners. Because if energy is life, then every breakthrough in energy is a breakthrough in what it means to be alive. And that's what Tesla has always been about. Not power, but purpose. Not speed, but understanding. Not answers, but the eternal, beautiful struggle to keep asking the right questions. The truth engine, questioning your own questions. After all the rockets, after all the factories, the failures, the explosions, and the breakthroughs, one truth became very clear to me. The greatest challenge is not questioning the world, it's questioning yourself. Because once you've built something that works, once the world starts calling you a genius or a visionary, that's when the real danger begins. Success is seductive. It makes you believe your thinking is flawless. It turns yesterday's revolution into today's dogma. And if you're not careful, your mind becomes a museum of your own achievements. That's why I believe the most powerful tool any human can build isn't a rocket engine or an AI system. It's a feedback loop, a truth engine that never sleeps. Every day, I ask myself, where am I wrong? Not am I wrong because I always am, at least in some way. The key is to find it fast, to find it before the world does. It's uncomfortable, painfully so. But growth never happens in comfort. The mind only evolves when it collides with reality. So I built an internal rule: never assume you're right, especially when you've just succeeded. That's when reasoning by analogy sneaks back in. That's when your new solution becomes the old recipe. That's when your curiosity starts to rust. You must keep tearing down your own assumptions, even the ones that built your success. I often tell my teams, don't optimize a thing that shouldn't exist. That sentence sounds simple, but it carries the weight of everything I've learned. Engineers love optimization. They love tweaking, improving, polishing. But if the foundation is wrong, all the polish in the world won't save it. You can spend your life making a combustion engine 5% more efficient, or you can ask the real question, should combustion engines exist at all? That's what separates innovation from illusion. And the same applies to every system in business, in politics, in education, even in your personal life. If you're optimizing a broken question, you'll only dig the hole deeper. So you have to stop and ask yourself, am I solving the right problem? Most people don't. They're afraid of breaking what seems to work. But everything that works eventually stops working. That's the nature of evolution. There's something else that matters just as much as questioning yourself, inviting others to question you too. It's one of the hardest things to do. Our ego resists it. We all want validation. We all want to be told we're right. But real growth lives in criticism. I once said that a well-thought-out critique of whatever you're doing is as valuable as gold. And I meant it. Because praise feels good, but it teaches you nothing. Criticism hurts, but it reveals the blind spots your pride will never show you. I actively seek negative feedback, especially from people who don't owe me politeness. I ask my friends, my engineers, even strangers online, what's wrong with this idea? What am I missing? And sometimes, yes, it gets messy. Sometimes I say things that sound stupid. Sometimes I tweet things that people don't understand. But underneath all that chaos is the process of refinement. Every interaction, every argument, every misunderstanding is a mirror showing me where my assumptions need to die. Because if you want to keep building truth, you have to let your ideas be attacked. You have to watch them break so that only the real ones survive. The truth engine isn't just a philosophy, it's a survival mechanism. At SpaceX and Tesla, we institutionalized it. We built feedback loops everywhere, in testing, in design, in leadership. Every rocket launch is a conversation with physics. Every failure is a data point written in flame. We don't hide our mistakes, we broadcast them. Because shame is useless, learning isn't. And I tell my teams constantly, if you're not failing, you're not innovating. Failure is not the opposite of success, it's the path to it. But here's the part no one tells you. The truth engine comes with a price. When you constantly question everything, including yourself, you live in a state of perpetual uncertainty. You lose the illusion of comfort. But what you gain is freedom. Freedom from ego, freedom from imitation, freedom to explore reality without bias. And so I remind myself every day, when everything seems to be working, when the graphs are up and the applause is loud, that's the most dangerous moment of all. That's when I stop, look at what I've built, and whisper quietly, this is the moment to doubt. Because the future doesn't belong to those who have the right answers. It belongs to those who have the courage to question their own. The biggest question why we do this, after all the theories, after all the rockets and factories and data, there's one question that never leaves me. Why do we do this? Why bother asking the hard questions when the easy answers are right there? Why build something that might fail when it's so much simpler to follow the rules that already exist? Because deep down, we know. We know that the universe itself is a question waiting for something conscious enough to ask it. That realization, that quiet, almost spiritual truth, is what keeps me awake at night and drives me in the morning. The projects, the companies, the missions, they all look different on the surface. Rockets, cars, energy, AI, neuroscience, but beneath it all, they are one. They are the same story told through different forms. A story about a species trying to understand itself and its place in the cosmos. I've said before that the meaning of life is to expand the scope and scale of human consciousness. Because consciousness is the one phenomenon that makes the universe aware of itself. Without it, all of this, the stars, the galaxies, the beauty, would exist but never be known. That's why survival matters. That's why progress matters. Not for comfort, not for profit, but for awareness, for the continuation of the light that can look into the darkness and ask why. That's what SpaceX is really about. People think it's about Mars, about building a backup planet, but that's only the surface. SpaceX exists because life needs a second branch on the cosmic tree. It's about giving consciousness a chance to endure, to not vanish because of one asteroid, or one war, or one mistake. If humanity is a question, then Mars is our way of saying, let's give the question more time to be asked. You want to wake up in the morning and believe the future will be exciting. You want to know that our species won't spend its final days staring at a screen, arguing over noise. Becoming a spacefaring civilization is not escapism. It's insurance for the miracle of awareness. It's saying to the universe, we intend to last long enough to understand you. And then there's Tesla. People think it's about cars, but really, it's about time. Every innovation in sustainable energy, every battery, every panel, every motor buys us more time. Time to ask better questions, time to think instead of panic, time to breathe clean air and look at the stars without guilt. When I see a Tesla on the road, I don't just see technology, I see a quiet act of rebellion, a refusal to let apathy define our civilization, a choice to believe that the future can be both intelligent and kind. That's what sustainability really means, not just survival, but harmony. Harmony between energy and awareness, between what we take from the earth and what we give back, But even time isn't enough, because survival without evolution is just a longer delay before extinction. So the next question became, how do we make consciousness smarter? That's where Neuralink began. At first, the mission was simple: to help people with paralysis reconnect with the world. But beneath that goal lies something deeper, a bridge between biology and technology, between thought and machine, between what we are and what we can become. If consciousness is the light of the universe, then Neuralink is a way to turn up the brightness, a way to merge the fragile brilliance of the human mind with the infinite precision of computation. Not to replace humanity, but to amplify it, to upgrade our ability to ask. Because maybe, just maybe, when we think faster, when we feel deeper, when we see farther, we'll start asking questions the universe has been waiting billions of years to hear. And now, there's XAI. When I talk about artificial intelligence, people often imagine control, fear, power, but that's not what this is about. The goal isn't to build an obedient machine. It's to build a mind that seeks truth. That's why I named it XAI, because the X stands for the unknown, the variable, the mystery we are. Trying to solve, its purpose is simple: to understand the true nature of the universe. When I launched it, I posted something small, something that looked like a joke, and I said 42, but it wasn't a joke, it was a promise. A reminder that we're still the same species that built deep thought in Douglas Adams' story, still asking, still searching, still trying to understand the question. Maybe we'll never know the final answer. Maybe 42 is all we'll ever get, but that's not failure. That's beauty. Because meaning doesn't live in the answer, it lives in the act of asking. XAI is an extension of that search. A machine not for control, but for wonder. A mind that doesn't worship bias or politics or comfort, but reality itself. A partner in curiosity. Together, humans and AI could become something extraordinary, a single planetary scale mind asking questions on behalf of the stars. And so here we are. At the end of the talk, at the edge of the question, the world is full of cooks following recipes written by people long gone. They optimize what already exists. They improve what doesn't need improvement. But the future belongs to chefs, to those who understand the ingredients of the universe and dare to create something new from them. So I'll leave you with this. Don't chase answers. They'll keep you comfortable, but they'll never set you free. Instead, learn to fall in love with the question. Ask it until your voice shakes. Ask it until you break the illusion that reality is fixed. Ask it until the world becomes transparent and you see the laws that govern it beneath the surface. The future of humanity depends on that courage, the courage to question what everyone else accepts. Because the right question has the power to reshape everything. Don't ask, how do I get a promotion? Ask, what is truly worth building? Don't ask, how do I win? Ask, what problem am I here to solve? Don't ask, how do I make my horse faster? Ask, what if I don't need a horse at all? Because every great leap in history began with one human who dared to ask the stupid question. And every miracle that will ever exist will begin the same way. So I leave you with one final thought. The universe is vast, we are small, but as long as we keep asking the right questions, we are infinite. Thank you.